I recently released a video proving the RetroTINK 5X and 4K are an easy and high-quality way to digitize your home movies in HD or 4K. Their built-in time-based correction and comb filtering allow them to perform better than most analog capture cards, and since they save in your target resolution, there's no post-processing needed. But what if you occasionally find a tape or clip that's really important to you? Something that you'd like to archive in its native 480i format, both to scale to 4K using the best methods available today, but also to hold on to that original file in case future methods are invented that could do an even better job. Well, as long as you have the right capture card, the Tinks can do direct 480i pass-through too. Let's take a look at how. Okay, I need to start with some important disclaimers. First, this video is essentially for people who want to use their Tinks as a time-based corrector and comb filter. You could buy a brand new $50 capture card that'll work similar to the RetroTINK 5X's 2D comb filter, and you could try to find used internal capture cards for around the same price that'll have a 3D comb filter similar to the RetroTINK 4Ks. But none of those have a time-based corrector. That means anyone who wants to record magnetic tape media like VHS or Video 8 will need an external TVC. And those can cost anywhere from $100 to a few $1,000s. So I just wanted to start this video out answering the inevitable question of why should I buy a Tink to do what a $50 capture card could do? And the basic answer is because of its time-based corrector. Plus, if you already own one, you'll get the benefit of both scaled and direct capture based on your needs. The next and equally as important disclaimer, in order to do everything that I show here, you're going to need to find a capture card that could reliably accept 480i over HDMI, and the only one I could find that does it is the Magewell USB HDMI Capture Gen 2, or the 32060. I'll leave an affiliate link to make sure you get the right one. At the moment, they seem to be going for pretty cheap on eBay, so I was happy to buy one just for this use, and I have the bonus of having a spare HDMI capture card now. I think other Magewells work similar to this one, and I'll try to keep a list of other capture cards that could reliably capture 480i over HDMI, but every other card I've tried either doesn't work at all, has a few issues, or sometimes works but is pretty flaky. I'll show you how to test your own later on. Next, you'll need to watch the other Tink VHS video I did to bring you up to speed for this one. Sorry to be the YouTuber that asks you to watch multiple videos, but I try really hard to respect your time, and I didn't want this video to be twice as long, filled with the same info that's already in that one. Also, a disclaimer for people in PAL territories, I only have access to NTSC equipment, but I think PAL users could follow this guide and just change the resolution and refresh rates to match their content. Sorry about that. And lastly, this video isn't sponsored by anybody, but I'll be using affiliate links wherever possible because that's the only way this channel could stay alive. If that somehow offends you, oh well. Anyway, let's get started. Before we start recording, you'll need some free software, and of course, you'll need the drivers for a compatible capture card already installed. The Magewell card I'm showing here is a simple installation. Just run the installer that I linked to in the description. After that's done installing, open the Magewell USB Capture utility, select the Video tab, and set Deinterlace to Weave. If you forget this step, the capture card will force deinterlace the signal, completely defeating the purpose of this guide. If you're using any other capture card, check every single setting to see if there's anything related to deinterlacing. I'll show some tips on how to test your card later, but for the remainder of this guide, I'll just be showing the Magewell card. Now install the Lagarith codec. Just a note, using the FFV1 codec is probably better for archival stuff, but it's harder to play back. Also, I've never had an issue with Lagarith, so I suggest you just use lags for recording, and if you really want to save it in another format, just convert it after. Next, unzip VirtualDub to a folder. I'll just put it on my desktop. I'd reboot at this point just to be safe, but that's it. Super easy. Setting up the RetroTINK 5X and 4K for 480i pass-through, as well as updating the firmware, is the exact same process I showed in the other video, just with 480i pass-through enabled. I'd rather not waste your time showing that again, so please reference the other video to bring you up to this point. Here's what you'll need to know though. First, it might be easiest to make these changes with your RetroTINKs connected to a TV, as basically all TVs accept 480i over HDMI. However, most PC monitors do not. So if you don't have access to a TV, maybe just skip to the next section, set up your capture card, then come back. If you're a RetroTINK 4K user, just download the latest capture pack I linked to in the description and paste it into the root of your SD card, overwriting whatever's there. Note that this will overwrite custom mode lines, but if the only custom ones you have are from the previous VHS TINK video, then you're totally fine. As a note, the only difference between the new profiles and the VHS profile I showed last time was enabling the new 720 by 480i output resolution that I included in the zip, setting it to Genlock, and setting the aspect correction to 1:1. The aspect correction is something you should double check at least the first few times you record, even with the profiles I provide. See, some VCRs like this one actually display their menus in 240p to make it easier to read the on-screen text. I tried to compensate for this in the profiles, but just to be safe, start playing a video and make sure it says 1:1. I also saved separate profiles for composite in S-Video, as Joe from GameSack found some potential issues when enabling the 3D comb filter for S-Video sources. I figured it was just easier to have a profile for each that changed both the input and comb filter setting automatically. I also included one for 4K S-Video capture to use alongside the original composite profile I created for the same reasons. Moving on to the TINK 5X, setting up direct capture requires you to manually build the VHS profile first, as shown in the other video. So follow that guide exactly. Then, after you've completed that profile, load it up, and I'll walk you through how to add a 480i pass-through version. After loading the other profile, back out, move up to the OSD menu, and enable Advanced Resolutions. Back out to the HDMI output menu and change VSync to TBC. If you have a source playing, it might give you a reading, but if not, it'll say TBC unlocked. That's fine. Now, back out to the Output Resolution menu and select 480i. I also like to enable pass-through everywhere, even though it might not be necessary. Go into the H-sampling menu and enable Allow Interlace. Then back out to the deinterlacer menu and change DS pass-through to Yes. Now go to Save Profile and name it whatever you'd like. I just called mine VHS 480i. It's probably a good idea to check the scaling cropping menu with each new source on either TINK, even though I haven't had to adjust anything I've tested. I have checked every one just for peace of mind, or just to make sure that there's no extra noise on the edges or anything that might annoy you. I usually like to leave all of that noise though, especially for original 480i captures. Alright, you're all set up. Now anytime you need to load 480i pass-through, simply just load the profile on either TINK. Recording is the same process as any direct 480i capture, but I'll walk you through it anyway and focus on stuff you might run into with this Magewell card. Open VDub, then go to Capture, Capture AVI. Now click on Device, and if you're using the Magewell card, select USB Capture HDMI. The screen will probably look wrong. That's fine, just go to Video and hit Preview. If you're using the RetroTINK 4K with a capture card that maxes out at 1080p, like this Magewell card, simply wait for your RetroTINK 4K to boot, then hit the 1080p button on the remote. You should see a signal on screen, then you could just confirm the resolution. Once you get a signal, load the 480i profile you just created. Then load the software that came with your capture card, in this case the Magewell USB capture utility, to verify that the input resolution coming from the TINK is 720 by 480i. Take a moment to double check that your capture card config software is set to deinterlace properly, and if it's a Magewell, that'll probably mean check in the Video tab that deinterlace is still set to weave. Now go back to VDub and go to Video Capture Pin. Then set the output size first to 720 by 480. If you're using the Magewell, leave the color space at the default YUY2. While I always recommend using the best options for archival captures, the Magewell simply won't let you record in 480i in the RGB color space. I'm not sure why this is, as the Magewell cards are supposedly able to handle 444 capture, but YUY2 is a 422 codec, and you're really not getting anything better than that via composite or S-Video, so I'm okay with it. Let me know in the comments if you got yours working with the RGB color space though. Here's some other Magewell related issues. Note that when I switch back and forth between color spaces, the output size changes. That's why I start with output size, don't touch color space, then just hit the up arrow to set the video to 2997. That sets the resolution to 2 fields per frame, resulting in the exact file you'd expect for 480i. You'll want to note that every time you go back into this menu, the settings go to default. It's annoying, however, while it seems complicated as I'm walking you through it step by step, it's just this: video, capture pin. Set the resolution to 720 by 480, then hit up until you see 2997. Then hit OK and don't enter that menu again for this capture session. Super easy. Now go to video and compression. And as I said earlier, I prefer Logarith for recording. Select that, then hit the pixel format button and set it to no change. This will let it record in the exact color space your card is outputting in a lossless format. Then go to audio and make sure the correct device is selected. If you're using the Magewell, you're probably using it for audio too, so just make sure that USB Capture HDMI is selected. You could use this to record audio from a separate device if you prefer though. Now go to Audio, Compression, and select No Compression. I'd also go to Audio, Raw Capture Format and choose your preferred format. If you're not sure what to use, just use the highest setting. Hit OK, then stop. Before you capture, you must check your source device and disable any kind of on-screen menus, blue screens, or video stabilization. Auto tracking is usually a good thing to leave on, but I'd turn off any processing. This VCR should be set to edit mode, but if your VCR has something like this, it'll probably be labeled differently. Also, video stabilization often produces negative effects with tape transfer, so definitely disable it. And any on-screen stuff is annoying, especially any blue screens during dropouts, so turn that off too. Now go to File, Set Capture File. I'm just going to save this on my desktop, but note that it will overwrite any existing file of the same name, so always rename your clips after your capture. To record, just hit play on your source and go to Capture, Capture Video to start recording. As a note, you might see frames dropped or inserted right when you start capturing. As long as it's only a few frames at the beginning, it's not that big of a deal at all. However, if you see that happen again throughout the recording process, stop. There might be something wrong with your PC or setup. I'm using a decade-old laptop to record this footage, and even that has no problem keeping up with 480i lossless. No dropped or duplicated frames at all. As long as your PC isn't really old, you should be fine. Now you're all set. I suggest starting out by doing a test recording first, just to make sure everything's working properly, and you should try to get something with at least a little movement on screen. Okay, so now let's check that test footage and see how it worked. There's a few things you want to test each time you start a new capture. The first is simply playing back the file, but I'd close VDub and reopen it just to make sure no settings from a previous session carry over. I've made that mistake quite often. Then drag the file you've captured into VDub and hit play. If the audio and video are in sync and it looks okay, let's test field order. First, make sure your preview window is set up properly. Go to View, Pane Layout. Enable both input and output panes as shown here. Then I'd also enable both panes, auto size panes, and pan and zoom center. Now go to Video, Filters. Hit the Add button and select Deinterlace. Choose YADIF, double frame rate, then top field first, or TFF. Now move through a portion of the video with motion, one frame at a time, and see how it looks. As a note, sometimes seeing the interlaced file on the left is distracting. It sure is for me. If you go to View, you could uncheck Enable Input Pane. Now when you play or scroll frame by frame, you'll only see the deinterlaced output. This looks fine, but now I'll go back and change the deinterlace filter to bottom field first, or BFF, and see how that looks. See how it jumps like this? That means the fields are out of order and top field first was the correct selection. To be clear, it does not matter if the file is TFF or BFF as long as you know which it is. All the stuff I've been capturing just happens to be TFF, but if I ever ran into a BFF file, I'd probably just add that to the file name just as a note. Oh, and after it's verified, you'll want to re-enable the input pane again so it's all working as expected next time you launch VDub. And that's really it. As long as the audio and video are in sync and you've determined the field order is correct, you're all set. If you run into issues, it's most likely from using a capture card that's not fully compatible with interlaced resolutions. I'll go over that later. And that's really it. As long as the audio and video are in sync and you've determined the proper field order, you're all set. If you run into any issues, it's almost surely because your capture card isn't compatible with interlaced resolutions. But I'll go over how to determine that later on in this video. Now I'd like to show the results of these captures and some basic comparisons. I guess the first thing to show is the same clip I took from a VHS camcorder captured on both an expensive high-end Osprey card versus the RT5X in pass-through mode. Both are captured via S-Video and scaled the exact same way. I could definitely see a difference in brightness, but the clarity and detail look identical to me. The brightness discrepancy could be as simple as the default Osprey settings versus the TINK profiles, and I'm sure tapeware has something to do with this, as I've captured this clip about 50 times already. Luckily, it's really easy to adjust the settings on both TINKs, so if something seems a bit too bright or dim in your test capture, just make basic adjustments the same way I showed in the other video. In a perfect world, every VHS camcorder would have added a color bar pattern to each VHS tape to make calibration easier, but that's just not realistic. Honestly though, out of all of the side-by-side comparison shots I've done to prepare for this video and check out how the TINK works, I have never seen a detail or clarity difference versus any high-end capture solution, including the Ospreys. So that's all the proof that I need that the TINKs will absolutely hold their own against even the best direct 480i capture solutions. Next, the time-based correction still works just as well as when outputting full resolutions, which is something no other 480i capture device offers. Here's a quick example of both TINKs using these 480i pass-through profiles next to the high-end Osprey card with no TBC in between. See the jumpy video? It's not just AV sync issues. Time-based correction is really required for all magnetic tape media, even just for short little clips like these. Longer captures can really demonstrate how well the TINK's time-based correction works. So here is that Eurotrip VHS from the last video, once again recorded from start to finish, from the moment the tape began till after the credits, using both of the TINK's 480i pass-through profiles that we just created.
Oh my God. Fiona! 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 You will be incinerated along with the valuables that you have hidden in your anus. Along with the valuables that you have hidden in your anus. Should a fire occur due to a faulty wiring or...
There you go. You can't get any more proof than that the RetroTINK's time-based correction is still working even in pass-through mode. Also, quick side note, Joanna Lumley is freaking awesome, and if I had a choice to drink with any fictional character, it would most likely be Patsy. I digress though. The other reason I recommend using TINKs for capture is the comb filters, and they work exactly the same as in full resolution mode. I went over this in detail in the previous TINK video, but I just wanted to make sure you saw it working via 480i pass-through as well. The RT5X has an excellent 2D comb filter, and the RT4K has a very good 3D comb filter. Not the best, but really good. I'll have another video out soon that goes into detail as to how to scale all of these direct captures and how they compare to other methods, but I want to show one more example here, mostly to correct a mistake I made in the previous video. Remember the comparison shot with the dog? I messed up the field order of the Bravicon scale in the other video, so you'll see some stutter in the previous comparison. Here it is now with the proper field order selected in Bravicon, so it'll look smoother than last time. The point I made in the other video still stands though. Direct capture and really slow software processing could have better results for home videos, but at the cost of time. Remember that when using the TINK's HD output, as soon as you're done recording, you're ready to share the video. But if you record in 480i, you'll always need to process before sharing or it'll look terrible. Seriously, you have to deinterlace before sharing. This is what YouTube does to a 480i file. Yeah, another reason to at least use the TINK scaling. On the flip side, as future scaling methods are invented, having an original 480i capture done right will allow you to rescale each time a new method is released. AI scaling isn't great for analog media now, but who knows what the future holds. There's one more mistake that I want to correct from the previous video. Remember that Sound Beast capture box I showed? I said I might recommend it if they fixed the broken aspect ratio, but I was wrong. Check this out. When it's recording, it just drops every other field and encodes the file as 2997. That means there's no deinterlacing, it's simply cutting the frame rate of your home movies in half and deleting half the information that's there. Avoid this box at all costs. Oh, and I'll explain what this counter thing is doing in the next section. So that's basically it for the comparisons. I just wanted to give you a basic idea of what to expect and the potential for what it could do for both wrong and correct ways to deinterlace and scale. I'll have another video soon that goes into detail as to how I did the ones that I showed here, and I also just want to briefly mention that sometimes software deinterlacing isn't going to be the best option. Maybe if you have things like mixed content or anime, just using a dedicated scaling box might be a better solution overall. That's completely out of scope for this video. I just wanted to make the point that taking the time to software scale isn't always the best solution, but you might get a little bit of quality bump out of home videos. Finding a capture card that can properly record interlaced formats has been an absolute nightmare. I've determined a few tests that can help you test yours, and there's a bit of a learning curve, but I really hope you'll stick around for this one, because this could also help any video game capture, which is going to be important for any 480i only games from HDMI modded consoles like the PlayStation 2, Wii, or even if you're using a GameCube digital-to-digital adapter like the Carby. The main test tool is, no surprise here, Artemio's 240p test suite. I used the lag test counter from the Wii version set to 480i with scaled assets, as the signal will be as close to a broadcast signal as possible. I'm sure you could use versions for other consoles, and I've personally tested the Genesis version's 480i lag testing counter as well, but if you don't have access to those, I created a basic DVD that you could use, with permission from Artemio, of course. I'll be showing the DVD I made in the upcoming examples, but I strongly recommend that you use video game consoles wherever possible because you won't have to worry about the 420 encoding that DVDs use. More on that in a bit. To use the console versions, check the options for a 480i mode, and make sure your console is set to 480i if you're using a Wii or Dreamcast. Then just run the lag test. Then make sure you've loaded the 480i profile on your RetroTINK. Since I'm using the Wii's component video out in this example, I'll just change the input to YPBPR after loading the profile. As a note, you could even use a RetroTINK 2X in pass-through mode for these tests, but as shown in the other Tink video, you don't want to use it for home video capture. Okay, let's start these tests by showing that Magewell card that we know works just as a control test. Set the Tink to 480i mode, and of course if you're using the Tink 4K, you'll need to start by setting it to 1080p mode first, or just assign that 480i profile to a button on the remote. After switching to 480i, be patient and wait a moment. Do you get a signal at all? If not, that's certainly an easy way to determine it's not compatible. But if you do, check to see if your capture card has any software that shows the input resolution. You can see it lists 720 by 480, and we've already set the deinterlacing to weave as shown before. Let's record a quick counter clip and verify. Now let's play back that file with deinterlacing enabled, just like I showed before in the test section. As you can see, the left panel shows the original file with both fields weaved together, but the preview window shows each field being shown as its own frame after deinterlacing. As a note, all we care about in these field order examples is the number in the upper right, as the 240p test suite is drawing a new number for each interlaced field drawn. If your capture card is capable of true interlaced recording like this Magewell, once deinterlaced, you'll see the numbers count up with each frame, with no numbers blended together. You could ignore the circles for the field order test, and you should ignore them if you're using the DVD. Now, those circles are actually very important, but I wanted to wait till now to talk about them because if your capture card can't properly record 480i, then there's no need to run the second test anyway. And that's why it's okay to use the DVD to run the first test. But if your capture card does accept interlaced formats, you're going to want to test to see if it compresses the colors down to 420 or if it could use higher color standards like 422 or 444. This will require a video game console though, so let me demonstrate why. See how two circles from that DVD are always lit up? And how they're both kind of purple? That's the DVD's 420 MPEG compression blending the colors from each field together. This is also a great visual example of why transferring tapes to DVD isn't a great idea, but I'll go over that in a different video. Now let's switch over to a recording of the console version of the test suite. As you can see here, each circle is red and the colors haven't blended into each other at all. That's because video game consoles output without color compression, so this recording proves the capture is both correctly recording both fields, as well as not applying any color compression. Okay, so now that you know what to look for, let's try that same test with AverMedia's Live Gamer 4K. We'll start by simply loading its Rec Central software while the TINK is set to 480i output. It looks like it's showing a 720 by 480 input, which is promising. However, there's no options for deinterlacing. Let's check the recording options though. Looks like there isn't even an option to record in 2997 when in 720 by 480 mode. Let's move over to VDub though and see if we could force any options. As you can see, the options are the same, which means it's probably going to apply some kind of deinterlacing. But let's check out what happens when we record in 720 by 480 at 60 frames per second. Alright, let's first start by just walking through frame by frame. It looks like the fields were combined, then the frame rate doubled. So there's two identical frames next to each other, each containing both fields. Adding the usual deinterlacing filter just doubled the frame rate without changing anything on screen. Just to be sure, I tried all other deinterlacing options and none worked. I suggest you try the same with your card just to be safe. The unfold field side-by-side option is a great way to view if there's actually two fields per frame, or if they're already deinterlaced and blended together. As you can see, this definitely didn't record in 480i. Let's try one more thing though. Since this card allows for 1920 by 1080 at 2997, maybe it'll record in 1080i? That would obviously mean it was scaling the file too, but let's just try. Well, it's advancing as expected when we play it back with no filters, so let's try a deinterlacing filter. It looks like the fields are blended together, and this is just doubling frames. Let's try unfolding the fields though, just to double check. Yep, confirmed. The Live Gamer 4K is definitely not capable of interlaced capture with two interlaced fields per frame. Let's try one of those cheap can't-link USB devices. It would be really nice if something so cheap worked. Looks like the device maxes out at 30 frames per second, but maybe it'll still work. I'll set the resolution and refresh rate, then give it a try. Sadly, this thing looks like it drops every other field, just like that Sound Beast box. Let's just double check to make sure there's no filters applied. Nope, it just drops all odd fields. I didn't really expect something like this to work, but it would have been nice. Since I just showed examples of cards that do and definitely don't work, I wanted to show one that I would call sorta works. I actually was hoping the Elgato cards that I tried would be part of that, but they were so unreliable, I couldn't even get them to work long enough to get test footage of to show you. So I would not use an Elgato for this unless you already own one and you just want to try it to see what happens. I did have some luck with the DataPath Vision series of cards though, so let's check those out. As we use the Vision software, we can see it's oversampling at 1440 by 480. That's fine because it still seems to detect the signal as interlaced 2998. In the Window tab, we see the deinterlace is set to weave. However, I think this is just a setting for the preview window. I'll change the usual settings and also put the resolution back to 720 by 480. Now I'll use VDub to set the capture to 720 by 480. I confirmed the frame rate and will leave the color space in YUV2. Now let's load it up and add the deinterlacing filter. It's definitely separating each field to its own frame, but check out that ghosting. You're seeing a different field blend into each frame. Let's go back and record it in the oversampled resolution that the DataPath originally detected of 1440 by 480. It'll be stretched, but that won't affect the quality, so let's try it out. If we zoom into that file, it looks like the ghosting is gone. So you could definitely use a DataPath card, but you'd need to record in 1440 by 480. Depending on what you planned on doing with the file, this might not be a big deal at all. In fact, if you're using software like BravoCon to scale to 1080p or higher, the result will be exactly the same as if you recorded in 720 by 480. I wanted to at least demonstrate the issue though, and I'd say we can call this a sorta work scenario. So while this last section was really long and probably boring, I do hope that people use it to test their capture cards to see if there are any out there that could reliably capture interlaced resolutions via HDMI, both for home videos and for any kind of video games as well. Also, a massive shout out to Fudo for helping me out with this section, because I would have never caught the 420 thing without him, and I've really just bothered him throughout this entire VHS process. So another shout out to Fudo, and thanks for your help. So look, I still think most people will just use the RetroTINKs to scale directly to 1080p or 4K and not bother with most of this. However, I definitely wanted to show it because, as I said before, I guarantee there are some clips that are just going to be really important to people that they want to archive in their native format and try to get the best scaling possible out of them. Of course, there's always the Doomsday Project, which I'll do a video on soon, and I will have that other video coming up that shows how exactly I scaled all of this stuff. But for now, I think that you have a pretty good idea of what to do and also what not to do. Definitely stay away from any of those cheap, crappy boxes you get off Amazon to digitize your tapes. They just simply do not work right. Anyway, if you liked this video, please consider subscribing to the channel, and there's plenty of ways to support even more, including ones that are completely free. Clicking on the RetroRGB support page and scrolling down will bring you to affiliate links that let you buy stuff from Amazon at the exact same price, but we get a small cut. Just click that link before going to your cart to help us out. If you're not super into this stuff but feel generous, maybe leave a tip directly through PayPal or Ko-fi. Even the smallest tip is appreciated, and links are on that same page. And if you rely on info like this, please consider signing up for monthly support services like Patreon and Floatplane. We recently turned off all ads on RetroRGB.com to make the experience better, but there's no way we could have afforded that without amazing monthly supporters. And of course, we have some awesome merch, so if you'd like to rock some RetroRGB gear, the links are right there as well. As always, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.